Hi, everyone, and welcome to How She Does It. I'm Karen Feinerman. I'm a longtime Wall Street investor, a mom of four, and a panelist on CNBC's Fast Money. Time and again, our high-powered guests tell us that one of the keys to being successful at work and bringing their best selves to their jobs is having the right partner at home. Having two parents who are working and raising kids can be tough. I have 4 kids and was thoroughly exhausted for 12 years, and I will never catch up. No one knows the importance of having the right partner better than Corinne Low. She's an associate professor of business economics and public policy at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Her new book, Having It All, What Data Tells Us About Women's Lives and Getting the Most Out of Yours, is a USA Today national bestseller and an Amazon Best Nonfiction Book of the Year. In it, she shares her own story of working at Wharton, having a new baby, and being in a marriage that felt lopsided. She eventually divorced her husband and thought critically about what she wanted from her life and what wasn't working for her. Or, as the New York magazine's The Cut said, and I'm quoting the headline here, "This economist crunched the numbers and stopped dating men, and she's never been happier." While that's her experience, it's not exactly what she's advocating for everyone. What she does have is a deep understanding of why working moms are feeling particularly stressed now. She is a fierce advocate for women understanding their money-making power, and she offers data-driven strategies for working with your partner to make your home a more equitable and sane place to live. This was a really compelling conversation. Hope you enjoy. Corinne Low, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for taking the train so we could be in person, which I love.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan, so nice to meet you.
That's very nice. Thank you. All right, let me jump in because I've got a lot to talk about here. So where you are right now, you're a tenured professor at Wharton. You wrote a best-selling book. But getting to this point, I know, having read the book, is not easy. And as women who are building their careers and their families, they feel this, what you call the squeeze. Mm-hmm. Can you share your story?
Yes. So what I talk about is the squeeze is something that I see in the data. It's when time pressures and money pressures tend to converge at the same time. And I was living that in my own life. And in fact, almost started doing that research to try to understand why everything felt so hard. And in particular, the question was, why am I so tired all the time? And at that time in my life, I was on the tenure track at Wharton. I was living in New York City and commuting 2.5 hours to Philadelphia. I had a newborn baby, and I found myself pumping in the Amtrak bathroom and just being like, what am I doing with my life? And meanwhile, I was also the sole breadwinner because my husband at the time had left his job to start a business, but that didn't mean that he stopped working or he was more available to support at home. It just meant that he stopped earning money. And so I was really feeling that squeeze of both time and money. And I started looking at the data and realized that it wasn't just me, that women today, especially working moms, are more time squeezed than ever before.
So in your book, you talk about what the expectation of parents now.
Yeah.
How did that change?
Yeah. So if you look at the data, parents today spend twice as much time with our kids as our own parents spent with us. So in the span of a generation, time spent with our children has doubled. And that especially impacts moms because moms are doing so much more of it already. And I look at it as two forces. One is just our greater understanding of child development. Economists call this a model of human capital, that if you invest in your kid, that you get more human capital out. And so we're just jamming more hours into our kids. And it's the soccer lessons and the music lessons and the tutoring. You know, I teach at Penn. Kids are applying at 17 with a CV. And I'm like, I don't know what a 17-year-old has to put on a CV, but what they have is a lot of time that their mom put in, right? And then it's also with young children that we see this sitting on the floor with your toddlers, the extended bedtime routine. My joke is I grew up in the 1980s and my bedtime routine was go to bed.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That is an excellent point. But okay, I wanted to go back to where you started a little bit. So tell me about the conversation where your husband tells you, I'm going to quit my job. How did that go?
Yeah. So it's hard because I think in relationships, you know, both people need to be self-actualized. And so for me, like when you said that, I was like, well, I want to be supportive. I want you to have this chance to follow your dreams. Here are my concerns, right, in terms of financially. So we set a time limit on it. We said we give it 6 months. If it's not profitable at that point, then you start looking for work. But the reason I am where I am today, which is divorced, is because it it kept becoming, 6 months more, a year more. And so at some point we were 4 years in and I was earning all the money, but I was still doing the lion's share of the parenting and the home production. And so that's what the data shows is that, when women earn less in a relationship, they pick up the burden at home, right? Mm-hmm. So they're making sure that everything is taken care of. And that's economic work, economic labor in itself, even though it's not compensated in the market. But what we see in the data is that when men earn less, even if they're unemployed and earning zero, they do not specialize in home production. So women who are the primary breadwinner still do twice as much cooking and cleaning as their lower earning male partners. And it was so important for me to look at cooking and cleaning because that's not inherently gendered. Like I understood having an infant and, pumping and, that there were certain things that biologically went along with that as mom, but I don't sweep the floor with my uterus. And,
yes.
So
that was a great line from the book.
Men can figure out how to do that if they want to. And so I think that's a big challenge that is facing working women today, especially high achieving women. And in fact, it's a challenge facing society because I think there are some women who are saying, well, maybe having a family is not for me because this feels like a bad deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you had a very interesting solution to this. Tell us about where you are now.
Yeah, well, I will say that this was not, a grand strategic plan, but it was me kind of reaching a breaking point and realizing my life needed to change. And you reach a certain point where if you are carrying that load at home that you think, this might be easier if I were on my own. And so I decided to get divorced. I moved to Philadelphia. I went from a 2.5-hour commute to a 7-minute commute to my job. I found a real community that supported me, and I started dating women because looking in the data and seeing how inequitable things were in heterosexual relationships, especially for female breadwinners, and knowing I was probably going to be the breadwinner in any relationship that I was in, I said, I don't want to replicate those gender dynamics again. I'm done with that.
All right. So that's sort of fascinating, this very sort of economically focused and intellectual with this, okay, I have the solution. I'm going to date women, and that's an option. So were you aware that was an option before this?
Yeah, so I will say the reason I don't think that is not a prescription is because it's not an option for everybody, right? And for me, actually, the dynamic of feeling so unsupported and feeling actually really kind of angry at the gender roles that it felt like were shaping our lives for us, that impacted my attraction. It was hard for me to be attracted to men, seeing these dynamics of, okay, if I were in this same position, the sole breadwinner, and I was a man on the tenure track at Wharton, I know that my career would be getting that support, would be getting that priority within the home, because I've seen that happen to countless of my friends where, female friend, she has a great career, but her husband's career is taking off a little bit more, pays a little bit more. They move for his career, right? They make sacrifices for his career. And that was not ever going to show up in my relationship for my career. And so that gender dynamic, the constant feeling of not having the support that I wanted, that impacted, what I wanted in a relationship. Because, what I always say to people is when we date, we go for who's cute, but nobody is cute when you're cleaning their toothpaste off the bathroom sink, right?
Yes.
And so there's so many things in a relationship that, it becomes about more than attraction. It's about support. It's about, real true partnership. It's about sharing the load. But those things actually echo back into attraction, echo back into the romance and the fun, because how are we supposed to have fun, if we don't have the support that we need? So I am happy to report back to say that I am now actually married to a woman and, have a relationship that just has a lot more shared partnership and ownership of those tasks. And I think the book, though, is for everybody and, is about, if you think, I want to find that within my relationship with a man, right? The book is also about giving you strategies to do that, because it's not about, that everybody needs to divorce their husband and marry a woman, but I do think that everybody needs to marry someone who does the laundry.
Well, one of the things I thought was really interesting, you said studies show women have more time after they're divorced, more free time after they're divorced than they did before.
What we see in the data is that when women get divorced, their time cooking and cleaning goes down, because instead of having another adult to share the load with and it being divided, their husband was creating work that they were doing when they were married. And so for the women who are saying, look, I just can't do this anymore, but I don't know how I'm going to survive as a single mom, I would say the data shows you might be surprised that things might actually get easier, because if your partner is not contributing in the household, sometimes it's easier to just remove that piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. So women who choose to say, all right, no, I'm going to try to stay in the marriage.
Yeah.
How do you suggest they help even the score if it isn't already even?
Yeah. So the ultimate goal is that you find a way to share the home production load in a way that is sustainable, is nourishing, and is what I call evidence-based. And what I mean by that is how you divide things should be based on strengths and preferences, not based on gender, right? So I don't think we necessarily want to aim for fair or 50-50, because relationships evolve, needs evolve, and people's strengths and interests are different, right? But you want it to feel nourishing. You want it to feel like when I'm cooking a meal for my spouse, I'm doing that out of love because I'm getting that love and that support in return. And when it starts to feel like I'm clocking in for a second shift, that's when you know things aren't working, right? And having that conversation with your spouse to say, how can we support each other through the economic production that we do at home? So how can we make it feel like we're caring for each other through that? It's a great way to get your spouse on board. Mm-hmm. And the key thing when you're having that conversation to say, like, look, I don't need a low-level junior employee to delegate tasks to. I need a co-CEO of the household. So you're getting a promotion. When we divide up these tasks, the things that are on your plate, I want you to have full and complete ownership of. I'm going to back off. You're going to do it your way, but you're not going to call me 10 times from the grocery store or ask me to remind you what our kids are allergic to or, when their appointment is, right? It's that ownership, the same way that men are able to take that ownership at work. I think that they have plenty of skills that they could bring into the home. And that's why I also push back on people saying like, oh, this is because women are better at some things. When I say, well, look, men spend so much less time cooking at home, and yet when I look at the Michelin-starred chefs, they're men, right? This is not a skill issue. This is a viewing these tasks as important, viewing them as part of the economic production of the home, and in fact, viewing your spouse's career as important for the success and thriving of the family.
Okay, so I love the co-CEO role. And I felt like that's what our marriage is, my house. There's a lot of women who like having things done their way. What is your advice for these women on how to let go a little bit of having it done their way?
We have to not be our own worst enemies, when it comes to giving up labor, and that comes to outsourcing as well. Like I talk also about outsourcing, and that can be another thing where you're like, but I can do it better. And it's like, yes, but you don't have the time. So you have to share that load. So the first place to start is to actually find things where your spouse is interested in or has a strong preference on something, right? Because if you actually have an area of the house where you're like, I actually don't care about this, but I know that it needs to be done, those are great things for your spouse to take full ownership of, right? Then you need to agree, like, what does done look like, right? So if you're saying he's in charge of lunches and then he's giving them, bagged chips every day for lunch, that's not actually meeting the goals, right? So it's actually outlining, well, when we talk about feeding our kids lunch, it's not just did they actually eat something that meant that they didn't pass out. It's are they getting a balanced nutrition profile? But then you got to stop. If he's not cutting the shapes out of the sandwiches,
crust
right?
on the edge.
Because, you shouldn't be doing that either right away. So you've got to say, look, what is the minimum viable product that we align on? And, how do we get there? And I think, that's where in a relationship that's not working, people also talk about this like weaponized incompetence, right? That for, some men, almost aggressively being like, well, I don't know how to do that, or I'm going to mess this up and I'm going to call you for help, and then her having to step back in. And so, that's where you get into some of those deeper issues and dynamics. But if you have a spouse who wants to help, right, then it is a matter of being able to let him take some of that ownership. And again, receiving that as love so that you can care and love through home production in return.
Home production.
Yeah.
Please give the definition the way you have it in the book if one isn't an economist.
Yes, exactly. So we call it home production, and it's all of that stuff that you have to do at home. It's literally making the beds, it's shopping for the food, it's making meals. You meal planning and assembling those groceries into a delicious meal, that is economic production because it is more valuable as a delicious meal than it is as a grocery bag of ingredients, right?
And time spent.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So how is it that, I don't know if it's a unique American thing or not, that the expectation for a man in a household for doing those home production kind of things is less than it is for a woman?
Yeah, so it's not unique to America at all. It's all over the world that
even
we see
like Denmark
this.
And places like this?
Yes. So the fact that I told you that female breadwinners still do more cooking and cleaning than their lower earning male partners, it's true all over the world. It's true in Scandinavia. It's true in Australia and the UK. Those gender roles are present everywhere. What's different is in some of those places there is more support, and in some places men do spend more time on parenting. But when it comes down to these other home production tasks like cooking and cleaning, the housework, men do less all over the world. One of the strategies that I talk about in the book for women just feeling like they get some relief, again, if you're not going to divorce your husband and marry a woman, is
just so you know, just for those listening, it is an option.
Yes. Kinsey says we're on a spectrum, right? But if you're not going to do that, one of the strategies I recommend is really taking a hard look at outsourcing. And I think some of our hesitance to outsource is because we don't see the tasks that we as women do as valuable. But even very modest income families take their car to the mechanic to get the oil changed. We understand that that's a valuable task and that it's possible or reasonable to hire somebody to do it. But the work that women do within the household, right? Organizing everybody's clothes, right? That is also challenging and valuable work. And it's okay to hire somebody to do it.
So how can we have the conversation without it seem like we're really just complaining about men?
Yeah. So one of my favorite prescriptions to recommend is to recommend getting some data in your household because you can't argue with data. And when I present my results that, the lower earning partner does, less of this cooking and cleaning, every man I've ever talked to tells me he's the exception to the rule. And they'll say like, oh, but I do more. I mow the lawn and I fix the windows. And I'm like, yes, men do more of those tasks, but it's actually a tiny fraction of household time because those things are done monthly or weekly or annually. And the tasks that women do are often done hourly, right? So getting the data within your household can be really helpful because what you do is you have the conversation to say, honey, I know we have shared values that we think both of our careers are really important and we think both of us should really be contributing around the household. I am feeling really squeezed and overburdened. And I'm curious if we could gather some data and see how we're spending our household time and see if there's anything that needs to change. And if you go to my website, I have a time tracking spreadsheet you can use and it's going to make graphs for you, right? Because if you feel like, maybe my feelings aren't enough, what I need to bring to the table are graphs, you track your time and you're going to see that he's seeing the tip of the iceberg of household labor. He's seeing, oh, I do half of the school drop-offs. And he doesn't see the iceberg of invisible labor underneath that was the time you spent shopping for clothes and making doctor's appointments and planning lunches and setting up play dates and aftercare in order for that school drop-off to happen, right? So you track your time and then you're going to be like, wow, we both said that we thought we should be doing this about 50-50. That was our shared value. And isn't it surprising that these graphs are showing something else? Now what do we do about it? So that way it's not about anybody's feelings. It's not about blame. You kind of have an objective benchmark to look at.
Okay, so how do you factor the money in if you're in a situation, let's just say heterosexual marriage and the man makes more? How do you factor that in?
So one of the quick checkups that you can do is when you're tracking your time is to see if you are both getting the same leisure time. Because if your contributions to the household are being valued equally, maybe it's true. If he makes more money, maybe his career is more demanding. So maybe it's okay that you do a little bit more of the home production. Maybe you feel that that's fine, that that's kind of a fair deal. You're both contributing. But what I don't want to see is there's a couple in my book that I describe where she says, I haven't been running in 4 years since my son was born. And he says, I go for for a swim for an hour every day, right? If you are getting unequal leisure time, then your household is not valuing your contributions equally. And then something needs to change. And so that's the kind of quick checkup, is actually looking at the time you get for yourself, because often what we see is the woman makes less. So now she's working double duty, that she's working and she's doing 100% of the home production. And that just doesn't add up.
All right. So I'm curious what you think of the Tradwives trend that we have now.
Oh, where should I start? I think what we are seeing is, and we see this trend online, that there are these influencers that are making being a more traditional couple, being a homemaker, look glamorous and easy, right? And I think there's a generation of women who are looking to us and they're saying, that looks hard. They seem really stressed out. Maybe this is going to be nicer. Maybe the problem is women trying to work and trying to do home production. And if I just could focus at home and just raise my kids and, bake aesthetic looking meals and, hand decorated cupcakes all day, maybe my life would be easy. But what they're really fetishizing is wealth. Okay. It has nothing to do with traditional gender roles. If you have a lot of money, then yes, life can be easy and glamorous. And the women who are packaging this content are selling a lie, because they are often their family's breadwinners, right? They are selling aesthetic domesticity when really that's their profession, that's their career. And for the women who are looking at that jealously, you're every bit as good at your career as they are at, making those hand-decorated cupcakes. And I think it's very risky. It's very dangerous for this generation of women coming up, because unlike us, who got the warning from our mothers that was, because they were the women who, were married during the divorce revolution. And there were many women in that generation who invested in home production exclusively, ended up divorced and starting over in their 40s with minimum wage jobs. So we got that warning that was, you have to have a way to support yourself. It is a tremendously economically risky position to rely on another's income, and not just because of divorce. There's what I call the 3Ds: divorce, death, disability. But then we'll add another one: layoffs, right? One job might not be enough to rely on. And so what I tell women, and I hope that that's where they will find themselves more seen in my book than in some of the kind of girl boss feminism of the past, is that there is nothing wrong with wanting to invest in your home, with wanting to invest in your children. There's nothing wrong with wanting or needing to step away from the labor force or, step back to some extent in your careers in order to make those investments. That can be a complete, successful life well lived. But you need to invest first in your human capital, because that is capital in the bank. I tell women to think of their careers as a machine that converts your time into money. Your human capital, your know-how, your knowledge, your training, your education is money in the bank that you can always fall back on. But if you set your sights on Tradwife now and you never make those investments, you don't have that money machine, right? And that's the women of the past who, as I said, ended up, and the data shows, actually ended up very economically badly off, because they had bought into a deal that said, okay, you go to work in the market, I work at home, and that only works if the relationship stays intact.
All right, I got to ask you one more thing. What does your mom think?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that she is happy for me right now, because she also saw me when things were really hard, right? We wish we could save our kids from our mistakes, so everybody has to make their own mistakes. So she saw me go through that. So I think, when she came to my wedding, she said, I'm just glad to see you so happy.
Okay, so you mentioned you were remarried. What does your wife, Sandra, think about being married to the person who wrote the book about things being equitable at home?
Yes. Well, this has been a topic of conversation from kind of like our very first date and very, first like moment of getting to know each other, because, I was coming out of such an unequal relationship and it was very much on my mind, and the funny thing is, I only found this out later, but, we met online, and then she had watched some of my economics talks before we even met up in person. And so she was very familiar with like my persona and the way I talk about things. In some of my talks, I talk about fertility as reproductive capital, right? I say that like love is the error term in the equation that, determines our decisions. And so she was kind of familiar with that. And then I was very embarrassed because I'm like, okay, there's a different persona that's like Professor Corinne versus like on a date Corinne. But she is very amused, I think, by the economics perspective that I bring into our everyday lives. And I think she's kind of adopted that language as well to some extent. And, our relationship is so different because we don't have gender roles making our decisions. And so at some point in our relationship, she was laid off, but then she was doing my laundry and she was packing my suitcase when I had to go on a trip, right? So it was a very different experience of kind of going through what is it like when incomes shift within a relationship. And that's what we see in the data is that, in gay and lesbian relationships, there's a lot more flexibility or elasticity to the income dynamics that are the reality of the couple because you don't have the gender roles making the decisions. Whereas, in straight relationships, what we see too often is that people get stuck in these roles even when the actual reality of their situation, and that was my first marriage, doesn't line up with those roles, right? Because then I was the breadwinner and he should have been almost the primary parent, right? But it was difficult to kind of let go of those old roles and step into new ones. And so we don't have that in my current relationship, because we don't have gender roles. And so she's been, the biggest cheerleader of my career, the biggest supporter of my career, and someone who's always then willing to be the soccer mom or be whatever I need in order to make it possible.
Mm-hmm. So you have an infant at home.
Yep. So I gave birth in May. So I had a book baby and a baby
Okay,
in the
that's
same
a
year.
lot. That's a lot to do. What's it like with an infant at home now?
Yeah, so it's funny because, I talk about the squeeze in the book and I had exited the squeeze and then decided to throw myself back into it. And, there are things that just about that period of life that just are going to be challenging, right? And so I think going through it the second time with a lot more support and with my life set up in a way that works a lot better, there's this realization of, okay, there's some stuff you just can't fix because there's some stuff that's just hard about having a newborn and a career. But there is other stuff that is structural. It is about how you set up your life. It is about where do you live, who is your partner, what supports do you have, and what's your job and what's your career path. And that's what I hope my book can help women map out.
Mm-hmm. So we were at such an interesting place right now, but I got to ask you, where'd you start out? As a child, did you think you would be a Wharton professor discussing home production utility?
No, but what is ironic is that as a child, I did always want to be a writer. I minored in college in journalism, but ended up deciding that that was not going to pay off my student loans. Mm-hmm. So I am ruthlessly practical when it comes to making sure that, the budget is balanced. And so I ended up going into consulting and then got my econ PhD. But it is interesting that has led me kind of full circle back to where I'm able to share the insights from my research career through being a writer. What I see when I look back at my career path is that I made investments that then built my skills and set me up to have more choices at the next stage, right? And so each of those investments I made, being a consultant at McKinsey, that set me up to have skills, have contacts, people that I'm still in touch with, right? That then gave me more options at the next stage. Getting my PhD in economics, I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a professor, but that actually gave me options, right? And so each stage, the career advice I give is you're making the right next step because you're never going to see the whole picture. Mm-hmm. But what I do want women to do is I want them to look down the path that they're on and look at the women who are more advanced in their careers, who are in that path and say, is that where I want to be going, right? Do they have the type of life that I want to live? And if you're in a career path where you say, she seems exhausted and angry. All of the women who are senior to me seem exhausted and angry, right? Then maybe are you climbing a mountain that you don't actually want to be on the top of, right? So how do you figure out how to build a career path that is going to evolve with you for those different stages of your life?
So for you, though, as you're going through this and you're building your employability, did you have specific goals like, okay, I want to be financially successful, or I want to be at a job that allows me to have other things in my life?
So I knew that I wanted financial security, and that was important for me, kind of having grown up poor. And I will say that I think the thing that was hard for me is that growing up with a single mom who kind of had to support us, I knew what I wanted for my career because I saw my mom struggling financially and I knew that I didn't want that. I didn't know what I wanted for my relationship. So I think I plotted my career path a lot more strategically and thought a lot more about each step and each investment that I was making than I did my relationship. Who you marry is the most important financial decision that you can make, right? It's the most important career decision that you can make because if your partner is willing to invest in your career, it's going to lead to so much more success for you. So I would say I wish that I had treated that decision with the same care and strategic thinking that I treated some of those career investments.
In your book, you talk about this notion that we have of women needing flexibility in the workplace. And really, you have a different idea that resonates so much with me. Tell us about what your idea is.
Yes. So what I say is that women don't need flexibility. They need boundaries. And this is data driven. There is a study that shows that if you offer women a 40-hour-a-week, 9-to-5 job versus flexible hours versus work from home, women are not willing to give up pay to get those flexible hours to get the work from home. But if by contrast you offer another job where the hours are set at the employer discretion, meaning she might have to work at 6 a.m. one morning or the next day she might have to work in the evening or she might have to work a weekend, women are willing to give up almost 40% of their pay to avoid that employer discretion job. So that tells me it's not that women want flexibility, it's that they want boundaries. And firms are calling it, oh, women need all this flexibility because they don't want to admit that it's actually a management problem, that they are letting work spill into all hours. And if women want so much flexibility, I say, why is nursing, which is a fundamentally inflexible, in-office job, why is that 90% female? It works because it's structured and it's predictable and you can plan childcare around it. And I think a lot more firms could provide that structured, predictable work once they understand that that's actually what their female employees need. And there's a huge payoff in doing it because it's just about getting women through the squeeze. And then you get to reap the benefits of retaining that tremendous human capital and talent all through their productive working lives. And so if you can offer more structure and predictability in the squeeze, you're going to get the payoff and I think a competitive advantage forever.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the game's not easy, I know. And you always suggest, okay, having it almost.
Yes.
How did you come up with that?
Yes, so that's my new take on having it all is I'm like, look, if your version of having it all is that everything is going to be perfect and I'm somehow going to be an 80s super career woman and an Instagrammable Tradwife, those are two separate full-time jobs that do not fit in one 24-hour day. So I say but can you have a life that has both a meaningful, productive, and financially successful career and has fulfillment and time with your family and lets you be the type of parent you want to be if you want to be a parent and also has time to relax and take care of your own needs? Yes, you can have it, but you're going to have to let go of either of those things being perfect. And that's figuring out what do you actually need in your time basket, what actually fits. It's radically prioritizing the things that you need to be happy and fulfilled and learning to let go of the rest.
Okay, Corinne, it's time for the lightning round. So we have some fun questions for you. A few would you rather, and all I ask is just give the first answer that comes into your head. Okay, here we go. Would you rather teach an 8 a.m. class or a 4 p.m. class?
4 p.m.
Okay. Would you rather take the Acela from Philly or an Uber here?
The Acela, at least I can work.
Okay. And they have that bathroom for pumping.
Yes, that's right.
So that's good to know. Would you rather be at Smoky Joe's, an iconic institution at the University of Pennsylvania, which is a bar that's been there forever? I don't think they've washed the floors since it was built in the early 20th century. Would you rather be there at Smoky Joe's or anywhere else in the world?
Well, if I could choose anywhere else in the world, I'm sure there's something I'd prefer. But, Smoky Joe's is a good time, too.
Okay, good. We know you like yoga. Would you rather do a side plank or a headstand?
Side plank.
Okay. What is your favorite spot in Philadelphia?
The Barnes Foundation.
Ah.
It's this amazing collection of Impressionism that I think is the best collection outside of Europe. And it's a great place to go and just commune with art. So if you visit Philly, you got to put it on the list. Go to the Barnes Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good call. What books are on your nightstand or your Kindle right now?
Oh, great question. Becoming an author means that I am like reading lots of books by friends. And in fact, now I'm getting asked to blurb books. And so right now I'm blurbing The Ambition Penalty by Stephanie O'Connell.
Okay. Do you have a hidden talent?
You know what's funny is that I actually worked a lot of odd jobs to put myself through college and grad school. So people often say that I do have many hidden talents because I worked at various times as a Pilates instructor, as a makeup artist, as a bartender. So yes, I have a few.
Okay. Would you rather cook or clean?
Cook.
Okay. What's one thing you miss about New York City?
I had a Trader Joe's like across the street from my apartment. And now I have to get in the car to get groceries. And that has just introduced a whole other layer of complexity to my life.
Okay. What is something you've changed your mind about in the last year?
Oh, gosh. Great question. I'm going to just go fun with it, and we'll go with like matcha. I thought it was overhyped, and then I had some really good matcha, and now I'm a convert.
That is a good answer. Okay. What is the best advice you've been given?
When I was at McKinsey, I had a female mentor who said, everybody else works for McKinsey. I make McKinsey work for me. So she said, the goal of your career is to get more from your job rather than just serve. And I say that to a lot of people, like flipping your mindset from, am I good at this? Am I doing a good job? To what am I getting? How is this job investing in me? And in fact, sometimes you're getting the biggest investments when you're bad at your job, when you're making mistakes, because that's when you're learning and you're growing.
That is excellent advice. What did you do with the first big amount of money you made?
The first amount of money I made, I paid off my student loans when I graduated college. And then the second big amount of money that I made, I bought a house, which I think is, probably a pretty common answer.
What's the best investment you've ever made, and what's the worst investment you've ever made? And a broad definition of investment could be anything.
The best investment I made is absolutely my human capital. So that is an investment of money. Said student loans, that's also an investment of time, right? There's an opportunity cost of getting a PhD versus working during that time. But I feel like I'm able to have the career that I have now where I have a lot of balance in my life because I made that investment then, because I spent my 20s not having the most fun, not earning the most money, working those odd jobs that I mentioned to, support myself, but investing in my human capital that meant that now I feel like I am able to have a career that I really love. So that's definitely the best investment. The worst investment was probably buying a condo in New York City, making money decisions when we had two incomes that did not work on one income. And so we bought high and then post-divorce sold low, which is always a tough thing to have to do. So that has got to be the worst investment.
All right. Well, Corinne, thank you so much for spending the time. It is a fascinating subject, having it all. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Wishing you all a week filled with easy commutes, productive work days, and peace at home. We'll have another great conversation for you soon. Until then, onward.
Buying a condo in New York